Coming up in this episode.
He knew that since September 11th, the protective measures at the embassy entrance had been reinforced.
My name is Don Snyder. I work for the CIA at Langley.
But what happened to him?
Professor Siza disappeared without a trace. A collaborator of the professor went to his house due to a constantly postponed meeting and found no one. The police inspectors entered the data into the search computer, which is connected to Interpol.
Hezbollah. I've heard of it, of course.
And do you know what Hezbollah is?
A group of people in Lebanon that has been at war with Israel. But what does Hezbollah have to do with Professor Siza?
Chapter 3.
Security at the entrance of the U.S. Embassy, a building nestled in a green corner of Sete Rios, had reached ridiculous proportions. Tomàs Noronha had to go through 2 police cordons and be searched twice before passing through a metal detection system and placing his eye into a small biometric device designed to identify suspects by iris recognition. Not to mention the mirror that security agents slid under his blue Volkswagen to check for any explosives placed in the car. He knew that since September 11th, the protective measures at the embassy entrance had been reinforced, but he didn't expect this. It had been a very long time since he last set foot in this place, and he never would have imagined that access to the diplomatic perimeter would turn into such an obstacle course. Greg Sullivan's bright smile greeted him at the door. The cultural attaché was a tall, blue-eyed 30-year-old with a dark brown hair, with a few strands of gray so meticulous about his appearance that it lent him a slightly Mormon air. He was self-assured, yet relaxed. Sullivan led him down hallways into a well-lit room with a large window that looked out on a sunny garden. A young man in a white shirt and red tie was sitting at the long mahogany conference table, his eyes glued to his laptop. He stood up when Sullivan arrived with the historian.
Don, this is Professor Tomàs Noronha.
Nice to meet you.
This is Don Snyder.
All 3 sat down, and the cultural attaché continued to direct the proceedings as if he were a seasoned master of ceremonies. Sullivan spoke loudly without taking his eyes off Tomàs, clearly indicating that his words were exclusively addressed to the Portuguese.
This conversation is not to leave this room. Everything we say here is confidential and will remain between us. Understood?
Yes.
Very well. Don, maybe we can start?
Okay, Mr. Noronha as...
Noronha.
Noronha?
Never mind. Call me Tom.
Tom. Very well, Tom. As Greg mentioned, my name is Don Snyder. What he didn't tell you is that I work for the CIA at Langley, where I'm a counterterrorism agent, integrated into a service belonging to the Directorate of Operations, one of the agency's 4 directorates.
Operations, you say? A bit like James Bond?
Yes. It's in the Directorate of Operations where the American 07s works. Although, strictly speaking, I'm not one of them. My job, I'm afraid, is not as thrilling as the adventures of my fictional colleague from MI6. I rarely have beautiful women around me, and most of the time, my missions are limited to routine investigations. Nothing exciting. The main objective of the Directorate of Operations is to collect secret information, often using human intelligence from human sources employing encrypted techniques.
Spies, you mean?
That term is a bit how shall I say, a bit amateur. We prefer to call them human intelligence, or human sources collecting secret information. Anyway, I'm not one of those sources. My task is reduced to analyzing information on terrorist activities, and that's what brings me to Lisbon.
Terrorism? In Lisbon? Those are two words that don't go together. There's no terrorism in Lisbon.
That's not quite true, Tomás. Have you ever driven in the streets of this city?
Ah, of course. We have people here who, behind the wheel, are more dangerous than bin Laden. Ha ha. That's undeniable.
Confused by the howls of laughter from the other two, Don Snyder smiled politely.
Let me just finish my presentation.
Excuse us. Please, go ahead.
The American typed something on his laptop.
I was called to Lisbon last week because of an apparently trivial event.
He turned the screen of his computer towards Tomás, displaying the smiling face of a 70-year-old man with a gray mustache and goatee, wearing thick glasses and having dark eyes.
Do you know this man?
No.
He is called Augusto Siza, and he is a renowned Portuguese professor, the country's foremost physicist.
Ah, he's a colleague of my father.
Your father's colleague?
Yes, isn't he the one who disappeared?
Indeed, 3 weeks ago.
Well, my father mentioned him to me just today.
Your father knows him?
Yes, they're colleagues at the University of Coimbra. My father teaches mathematics, and Professor Siza holds the chair of physics in the same faculty.
I see.
But what happened to him?
Professor Siza disappeared without a trace. One day, while his students were waiting for him for a lecture at the faculty, he didn't show up. The next day, he was expected at a scientific commission meeting, where he also didn't appear. He was called several times on his mobile phone, but no one ever answered. Although advanced in age, Siza is considered an energetic and very lucid man, which allowed him to teach beyond the usual retirement age. Being a widower who lives alone, with his daughter married, his colleagues thought he had left for some reason. Eventually, a collaborator of the professor went to his house due to a constantly postponed meeting, entered the apartment, and found no one. But he discovered the office in great disarray, with papers and files scattered on the floor, prompting him to call the police. Your investigative police came to the scene, the Justidaria, and
Judiciaria.
that's it. This police collected some samples, including hair, and sent them to the laboratory for analysis. When the results came back, the police inspectors entered the data into the search computer, which is connected to Interpol. The result was surprising.
A new face appeared on the screen, that of a dark-skinned man with a round face and a black beard.
Do you recognize this individual?
No.
His name is Aziz al-Mutaki, and he works for a unit named Al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya. Have you heard of it?
No.
It is the military wing of the Party of God. Are you familiar with the Party of God?
Not that either.
In Arabic, the Party of God is called Hezbollah. Does that ring a bell?
The historian slouched in his chair and shook his head again, almost sad that he appeared to know nothing about anything.
No.
Hezbollah. Of course, the Lebanese have a very particular accent. Instead of saying Hezbollah, they say Hezbollah. CNN says Hezbollah.
Ah, Hezbollah. I've heard of it, of course.
On the news, I suppose.
Yes, on the news.
And do you know what Hezbollah is?
A group of people in Lebanon that has been at war with Israel?
In a very simplified way, yes. Hezbollah is a Shia Islamic organization that was born in Lebanon in 1982, bringing together various groups formed to resist the Israeli occupation in the south of the country. It has links with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and there are even suspicions of a connection with Al-Qaeda. I admit I don't believe it. Al-Qaeda is a Sunni organization whose Wahhabi ideology openly excludes Shias. Bin Laden's followers are not far from considering Shias as infidels. This contradicts the hypothesis of any alliance between the two, don't you think? In any case, Hezbollah has been involved in several kidnappings of Westerners and attacks in the West, acts more than sufficient for the United States and the European Union to declare it a terrorist organization. The United Nations Security Council itself issued a resolution, Resolution 1559, demanding the dissolution of Hezbollah's armed wing.
But what does Hezbollah have to do with Professor Siza?
That is precisely the question your police inspectors asked. What were the hairs of a man wanted by Interpol for his connection with Hezbollah doing in Professor Siza's office in Coimbra?
What is the answer?
I don't know. I only know that your police immediately contacted the Portuguese intelligence service, SIS, which reached out to Greg, who then communicated the information to Langley.
Tomás looked at Greg Sullivan, and as if struck by sudden illumination, the truth dawned on him. His friend Greg the peaceful American who had so often called him to talk about the Hebrew Museum and to help him with negotiations with the Getty Center or the Lincoln Center, was as interested in culture as Tomàs was in baseball or Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. In other words, Greg was not at all a man of culture. He was a CIA agent operating in Lisbon under the guise of a cultural attaché. This sudden realization made him look at the American with a new perspective. But above all, it made him understand how deceptive appearances could be, how easy it was to fool a well-intentioned but naive person like him. Realizing he was staring blankly, the Portuguese man jolted as if waking up and turned back to Don.
Greg spoke to you, right?
No. Greg spoke with my deputy director at the Directorate of Operations. My deputy director spoke with my boss, who is in charge of the counterterrorism analysis office, and my boss sent me here to Lisbon.
Very well. But now, tell me one thing, Don. What am I doing here?
I have no idea. I was tasked with explaining the parameters of my mission to you, and that's what I've done.
Greg, what have I got to do with this?
I believe it's not my place to answer that.
Then whose place is it?
He should be arriving shortly.
My name is Frank Bellamy, and I am responsible for one of the 4 directorates of the CIA.
Isn't that where the first atomic bomb was made?
Ben-Gurion did indeed ask the physicist to design an atomic bomb for Israel.
And Einstein. Did he accept the request? Iran?
Saddam Hussein, but the Israelis destroyed their facility. So you don't know who finances Hezbollah?
And you came to Lisbon to tell me this?
You're a fucking genius.
If you're enjoying this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified as soon as we post the next chapter. Don't forget to like and leave a comment below. I read them all.